We are live. Well, Roy, thank you very much for jumping on.
James, thank you for having me. Nice meeting you.
Not at all, not at all. So I would have done you an introduction there as part of the intro to the podcast, but in reality, it wouldn't have done it justice. Are you okay to give us a brief overview of yourself, your background, and then we can jump into things from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi everyone. Roy Gottlieb, 38, married, plus my son Ben, originally from Israel. Start my professional career, like many Israelis, in the technological unit of the IDF, working mostly on cybersecurity projects that we can all like kind of relate with. Very, very quickly, I figured that, I'm probably not the most technical person in the room, and that's a privilege working with one of these bleeding edge, talent within these units. Spent almost a decade on the venture capital side, investing in mostly deep tech companies, mostly around IT and infrastructure. And then at some point, the impulsive symptom kind of killed me, and I said I want to go back to the operational side. Had a huge opportunity ahead of us. Partner with one of my friends and start Hopper. Recently moved to New York, so still adjusting. So that's briefly about me.
Awesome. Okay, cool. A lot in there to unpack, but if we focus on Hopper for a moment, then Hopper's been well, you've described this as redefining how we look at open source security. So, if we just start at the top of that, what was the gap you saw there, and how does Hopper fit in?
Great question. So basically, the gap we saw is open source has kind of been the backbone of software for the last 10 years or so. Yet what we've continuously learned from, speaking with customers and friends in the industry is that the more we rely on open source software, the more time it takes us to kind of maintain the pieces of software that we just bundle into our applications. So historically, we're kind of writing every line of code. We were intimately familiar with everything. And the guardrails around, secured applications were predominantly, checking the logic that we deploy. Modern application development is heavily relying on open source and AI models. So it's more of like a Lego work that you kind of bundle different components in. And that's a category that's relatively new, but it's been around for about 10 to 15 years. The problem is that as we grew our code bases and the more we were relying on open source components, the more alerts and findings and risks that we've identified in our code bases. And at some point, we learned that companies are patching their open source packages around 5 to 8% of the time of their engineering time,
Wow.
which was shocking to us because essentially, you're there to make money, you're there to build an application. Yet, more and more organizations are facing just an abundance of alerts and abundance of tickets around the open source components that they use, without really being able to filter what's real and what's not. And we'll touch on that soon. But at some point, we said there must be a better way to kind of reallocate the R&D resources that we're allocating today towards revenue generating tasks versus just technical debt and that back and forth between security and engineering teams.
Yes, yeah, it was, on the back of doing some research ahead of this call here and some other areas too. I couldn't believe the amount of noise that these DevOps teams are facing. I think you posted on LinkedIn or Hopper around, is it between 200 and $4,000 per alert that comes through is roughly the time that, or the money that equates to that time?
That is correct. So, surprisingly, this is a very difficult metric to measure, but the more advanced and mature companies we work with have actually gone through that work. So, what we learn is that following the triage process, whether automatic or manual, but every ticket you issue your R&D team actually costs at minimum a couple $100. Maximum could actually be a few thousand or even tens if it's like a whole refactor. So that means that we are spending enormous amount of our time patching our software instead of building new one. So yeah, this is kind of what was shocking and light open, like eye-opening for us. And the whole reason we said there must be a better way of doing it because we're just spending so much time, so much money. And what we've just discussed is after the whole triage process. So bearing in mind that before these $200 minimum to 4,500, there was somebody or a system in the loop that had to decide which ticket to actually open, and that was costly as well.
Wow, that's insane. And Hopper talks around eliminating 93% of the noise and vulnerability management. So, how exactly does that work?
So that works in a quite simple, cool way. The industry has a unique problem that is very interesting to kind of unfold how we got to that situation. But we are used to flagging risks based on a relatively naive process called version matching. The way
Okay.
we flag risk in our code bases today is, hey, James, let's inventory everything our code depends on, typically by analyzing what is tend to be called like manifest files or metadata files of some sort. Let's see if there are any known issues with the versions that we use. And if there is, let's flag it to the team or let's open a ticket to the R&D organization. That baked in an inherent assumption as if when James and Roy are developing an application, they are using every single line of code down 100% of their dependency tree, which is bloating, as we've just discussed before. So, uh, what we know as engineers that in practice, in reality, when you and I just want to implement something, we'll find a package that implements it well, but we're probably not going to consume every single functionality that the package has. Just to give you a numerical example, if we take a common library that also had a common vulnerability, like the log4j package, the package has 60,000 lines of code. In turn, they are exposing about 7,000 functions. In reality, only one function was vulnerable. How is Hopper
Right.
eliminating that level of noise? We combine two things that we know how to do really, really well. The first thing is we've automated vulnerability research at scale. So we took upon ourselves to kind of be that source of truth to really map not which version is vulnerable, actually which function is vulnerable for every vulnerability in the open source ecosystem. And then we've built a code analysis technology that allows us to tell James whether the personalized way he uses an application or a chain of packages is exposing him to that vulnerable part. Essentially, what we did is we've increased the resolution of the scan by over an order of magnitude, and by that we are eliminating the noise. So it doesn't come from like fluff or thin air. It's a combination of identifying where the function is and really being able to analyze the code base and say, is there remotely any way we are potentially making a call to that vulnerable function? This is what we call function level reachability analysis.
Got you. Okay, understood. And so, am I understanding correctly then that, pre-Hopper, if you like, the quote unquote legacy way of doing it would just highlight every single vulnerability within that open source software, and then you'd have to sort of go through that manually and gain context around it and figure out, is this going to hit me or not?
That is correct. And
Wow.
we did not invent the process. We just learned it from forward-looking companies and teams that actually do the work themselves. You know, everything that we do is humanly possible to do. We're not creating something that can be built. We've just mimicked the analysis and thought process of leading companies that actually did have the resources or the very limited resources of saying, okay, so if it's a critical vulnerability and now it's going to cost me $5,000 to kind of patch, let me spend like a couple hours or a day actually reading what this vulnerability really is, looking at my code, understanding, am I actually implementing any call to that function or not? So we actually learned it from the forward-thinking companies in the category. We've just understood that it'll be very difficult to automate that process at scale, and that is what we're doing with Hopper.
Understood. Understood. Okay, cool. Sounds really cool. And I read as well, this is agentless, right? So it's what, a 5 minute onboarding process?
Yeah, so quite early on, we've decided to take the agentless path simply because we wanted to make our customers' life the easiest.
Hmm.
To onboard a Hopper, essentially what you need to do is you just need to grant the Hopper platform with read-only access to either your source code management system or your artifact storing system, like an ECR, etc. Wherever you store the container, depending on what artifact you want it to scan. We're happy to scan containers. We're happy to scan source code, whatever is the easiest for our customers. But we didn't want to do anything that's heavy or aggressive on the integration. So we chose centralized integration points that our customers can grant access to relatively easily within, a few minutes, instead of getting into the complex process of deeply integrating into every CI pipeline or deploying agents in production or any of that. Obviously, there are other reasons for that decision, but we chose the lightweight, agentless 5-minute integration path, taking upon ourselves that we knew that meant we have to build a lot of tools to support that level of integration, yet not compromise on the accuracy and the efficiency of the scan.
Understood. You kind of touched on a few points there. I was just going to follow up with a question on why was that such a priority and why choose that route?
It was a priority for multiple reasons. If you kind of open up a bit, so the first thing we didn't want to do is develop agents, simply because the developing agents requires a bit more of a tougher integration to the customer. It has performance issues. It doesn't even necessarily solve the problem in the same level of accuracy because what agents do is essentially they sample the system at a significant rate. So you're getting into the probabilistic side of things. I think a modern system at the most accurate, aggressive way are sampling systems at around 19, 20, 25 times per second. That does not give you the coverage that you need. And also, it was very, very limited in terms of are we actually going to disrupt the SCA category with an agent way? Surprisingly or not, there is a significant portion of the world of applications that you just can't deploy agents on. What do you do in the healthcare industry where you ship medical devices? What do you do in the automotive industry where you ship cars? What do you do in everything client side, right? You have a lot of front end that you serve. You have a lot of mobile applications that you serve. So we didn't want to limit the coverage so narrowly to just be like cloud native backend runtime on a specific Linux system. So that's one. And compared to the other approaches, pretty early we were fortunate enough to kind of learn the hard-earned lessons from the more mature segments of the of the market. So we kind of wanted to be at the very least mid-mark up ready from the get-go. So we did our whole discovery, ideation, product building process with the leading companies in the world. Quite early on, they said, "Hey, do you guys need to integrate into like our CI pipelines? Because I don't know if everybody in the crowd knows what a CI pipeline is. I'm happy to describe that later. But you know what? I have 35 or 50 teams spread across 4 continents. We all together we have about 220 pipelines. If I now need to integrate you guys into every single pipeline, and that pipeline is deployed and managed by our DevOps or R&D team, that's a project in itself that I'm not sure it's worthwhile. So yeah, that would make your life easier if you could just integrate into my pipeline, but that would make my life a lot more difficult to integrate you. So this was kind of the lessons learned quite early on, either from a coverage and use case and usability standpoint, or just the market needs. Even without an agent, it's kind of where do you get the data from, and how do you make our customers' life the easiest in order to get the most value with the minimal amount of effort.
Yeah, I guess that kind of goes against the whole sort of ease of process that you're going for and time save if you're then having to do the agent side too. So how does Hopper's build time approach then compare with other runtime solutions?
So basically, what we're doing is we are analyzing the build artifact. I mean, obviously depending on the language, but let's say Java or .NET, like the common enterprise American languages, we've understood that analyzing just the source code is not enough. Why? Because many of the transitive dependencies are being brought into the application during build time, et cetera, et cetera. So we wanted to provide our customers with the level of accuracy of runtime, build time analysis, yet without being an agent like we've covered before.
Mm.
So what we've decided to do is basically build a very flexible system that caters to whatever our customers can give us. So if you can give us a container, we'll just scan the container statically without an agent. If you can give us access to the source code with read-only permission, we will actually build the code for you. So we've built a whole compiler around the generic capability of building code from source, no matter what you have there, using a combination of AI and compiler technology. Um, And what that allowed us to do is to get to that compiled artifact because the analysis is a lot more accurate on that one without requiring agents, whether modern agents powered by eBPF technology or legacy agents that are more classic instrumentation based.
Mm. I guess it also gives the customers that flexibility as well. Of it's not like a case of you must do things only our way and this is how we're going to do it. And it kind of gives them that freedom to give you access to whatever they want to do, I guess.
Yeah, maintaining that flexibility and really listening into what would make our customers' life the easiest in terms of the integration point and the integration process was key to us because in today's market, time to value and onboarding and the amount of resources that you're kind of asking a customer to invest before extracting value from your platform is just key. If 10, 15 years ago, you would have been open to going through a heavy integration process just to start seeing value 3, 6 months down the road, I think customers are a lot more demanding these days, especially in relatively more mature categories where they're like, is this really 10 times better? If it is, I want to see it like no later than today or tomorrow, right? Like I'm not going to spend a lot of time contemplating the idea of maybe implementing you or maybe transitioning from my current solution just to get to a conclusion in 3 months. I want to
Mm.
see value quite immediately.
Where do you think that push comes from? Is that just like the sort of instant gratification world we live in, or is that pressure from board or above?
So I think it's a little bit of both. I think it has to do with the fact that customers just simply demand more, especially around existing categories. So if you have a solution and you're looking to potentially augment it or change it, then you want to be able to kind of have that quickly. If you're solving a new problem that you have nothing for, maybe that's a bit of a different story. So that's one. And then I think it's a general industry maturity thing where I think the industry has matured across the board towards solutions that are relatively easier to operate across, implementation and ongoing basis, and also displacing. I think customers are a lot more aware of if it's heavy in, it's also a little bit more heavy out, and I'm not sure I want that vendor lock-in. Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's more of an industry maturity than millennials mindset of I wanted anything instant.
Fair enough. Good to get your take on that. And so it's 2025, so we have to mention AI. I think it's written in the bylaws of the podcast somewhere. But you've recently got into the AI space with a coding companion, right?
Yeah, so we've actually announced a whole set of AI products, and that was in response to where the market's heading. Um, in general, what we see is that if 3 years ago or 4 years ago, building an application was, hey, let me get a few open source components and a little bit of AI models, bundle them in. Today, whoever is actually doing that processing itself is an AI model or an AI agent, coding agent, Copilot, Cursor, ChatGPT, all of these. What that means for us as an industry is that a lot more code is being created. And interestingly enough, what we see is that developers are a lot less intimately familiar with the code that they build. So that means a lot more bugs. That means mean time to resolution for every issue is getting longer and longer, which is very counterintuitive. Like in theory, we wanted AI to kind of accelerate things. So it's definitely at least where it is today. I'm actually very bullish on where AI would be 5 years from now. But today we see we're generating a lot more code, yet we're a lot less intimately familiar with the code. So remediation and patching and analyzing is getting more and more difficult. What that means is that we had to kind of think, how is AI? And honestly, Hopper was an AI first company. We've implemented AI workflows in our vulnerability research team from day one. But what that means is that we've released additional set of products that have to do with, okay, if now most of your code is being generated by AI, let's try and shift that even left further and analyze the prompts. Or if now we are building applications based on AI models, let's map not just open source packages, but actually build a knowledge base of what are the models I'm using, et cetera, et cetera. So it was for us, it was quite a natural evolution of uh, how is modern software being built, what our customers say need, what are they, worried about, and how can we kind of have the Hopper value wherever they need it to be.
And what about sort of 2 or 3 years from now? What role do you see AI playing in application security?
So the classic, application security question and AI has two sides of the same coin to it. You have security for AI and AI for security.
Yep.
Um, right? So security for AI, I think we've kind of high level touched on, and I'm happy to expand on it, but it's basically being able to actually first of all, get the visibility layer of where are all of my AI assets or AI models, and what are the known and unknown risks with every model that I have in my stack, et cetera, and where exactly they're coming from, and what's the line of code bringing it, and what's the remediation path. So security for AI is a whole discussion. And then we see AI for security processes and for security teams also augmenting teams significantly, especially around automating triaging, processing a lot of information, generating reports, being able to correlate things from different sources, et cetera, et cetera. So what we see is that AI is not that mature yet on the pure research side, like novelty.
Mhm.
Yet, if you need to really process a lot of information in a very native human language way, this is where AI is doing a great job. And this is, for example, why we've introduced our AI agent called Grace, which basically allows you to integrate and interact with the platform in human language. So if historically your boss had to ask you, hey, are we affected by this? Or can you send me an email about, did you triage this? Or how many open vulnerabilities did we have last month? All of the things that historically we had to go into a product, filter some rows, look for a report, export that, sanitize it, attach it to an email, etc. So all of the workflows that were existing, this is where AI is really, really, really strong at kind of automating all this process, fusing a lot of information from different sources, augmenting the workflow of existing AppSec teams. But I still don't see it on the deep research, pure novelty side just yet.
Understood. Okay, cool. And so I guess on the same kind of subject to a point. So I saw Hopper announced an AI dependency discovery and model risk visibility. Please do let me know if I've got those terminologies wrong. But what's kind of like the unique approach around Hopper's view on securing not just open source software, but also AI models as well?
So basically, this all came from, demand from our customers where we understood that if for open source, we have a relatively mature method of inventorying everything our applications depends on. That was not necessarily the case for AI models to begin with. So the first layer is, do I even know which of my applications are AI powered? Which model is powering every application? How is that model deployed? Am I using it via SDK? Am I just making an external call via API to it, etc.? What are the known risks with every model? Because we don't really yet have that NVD, National Vulnerability Database, or OSV, that kind of is the ground truth for every risk associated with every model. So you need to map across different knowledge bases and novel research, what are the known risks associated with every model? And then once you find these risks, you also need to be able to provide the evidence and remediation recommendation to the engineering team to actually, okay, so what do we do? What do we do next? Um, so what we did is we basically understood that already today, what Hopper does really well is being able to inventory everything that your application is built on or depends on from an open source package, SDK standpoint, etc. But also very deep in what are you actually calling, what's the applicational logic, and what's the code flow, etc. So for us to kind of venture into, hey, let me also inventory every package that is known to have an LLM under the hood, or every SDK like Hugging Face, etc., that is basically making downloads to different models from a marketplace, and really pinpoint, are you calling it? Which version are you calling it? Which line of code defines the model? What are the known risks with every model, etc. Was something that was uh, very natural migration for us. It was such a natural evolution and an expansion of the platform.
On that then, do you see customers that maybe don't know that there's AI within or powering their applications?
So I think uh, customers were like it depends what point in time. So if they just got that initiative of, hey, AI is here, we gotta understand the risks, then maybe they kind of did the project of mapping, but not a single one has a very clear defined policy of how do you continuously manage and track these things. So we see different level of efforts across different customers around how you go about even inventorying, allowing, managing all of these things are just in their infancy. But very few customers actually know what is, under the hood in the software that they build. We've had multiple instances where, we just came in for noise reduction and then, hey, we have that capability around AI. By the way, we've identified a couple of AI powered applications in your code base. You want to see? And customers were like, oh, really? I didn't know that team actually uses Hugging Face,
Wow,
or I didn't know that team actually is using that model. Um,
crikey. I mean, yeah, if there's ever a justification for having something like this, I guess that's the conversation to have. Oh, we didn't know that was in there. Crikey. And so I guess like a lot of organizations must use more traditional tools. So what's the kind of tipping point that you see from that customer moving away from like a traditional SCA tool to something like Hopper?
So I think there is a lot of pressure on companies today to deliver a lot more with less or with the same resources. And I think CISOs and security organizations are kind of maturing and stepping up to become the business enabler that everybody wants the security organization to become. There is a very, big transition between purely a cost center to a business enabler. So the typic for us, the tipping point typically is that we need to kind of move fast. We need to unlock and kind of allow our engineers to really focus on business. We need to not accumulate technical debt. We need to comply with modern regulatory requirements. We see a very strong shift across the industry, even from regulatory bodies like FedRAMP, which is one of the more aggressive compliance frameworks, shifting from purely inventorying vulnerabilities more and more towards automating exploitability analysis. Why? Because the industry has kind of matured to that stage of knowing, what, patching everything is just not feasible. We're no longer in a world where we can just patch everything without really knowing if we're impacted or not on one side, but we can't be reckless and just leave everything in the backlog for on the other side. So typically the tipping point is uh, how mindful are security organizations to the toil and taxation that they're putting on their software engineering counterparts, how business enabling or security organizations want to become, because essentially when we are talking about noise reduction of the scale that we're talking, quite quite honestly, for every organization, if you told them, hey, what if I can free up $1 million of R&D resources? That's a conversation worth having. And I don't think we've ever seen anything less than these levels of value, depending obviously on the size of your engineering organization. But without really moving towards the more mature set of products, we would still be stuck patching enormous amount of tickets or blocking our engineering organizations unnecessarily. And in today's world where everybody wants to move fast, adopt AI, build more code, competing in the marketplace, do more with less, become, reduce friction, improve efficiency and velocity, etc. This is kind of the main tipping points.
Understood. And yeah, those are big numbers there, and I imagine the scale of which goes up as you get into your Fortune 500. I know you work with Fortune 500 as well, which is awesome. Is there any, I guess, particular results or insights that have resonated most with the Fortune 500?
So I think again, what we've learned is that customers want to be able to identify the risk accurately, prioritize the risk accurately, and be more mindful of their R&D organizations. Um, so what resonated the most is like when they come to us, many times they already kind of high level understand the problem. They know they can't keep investing in, triaging every vulnerability or opening every ticket. Um, and they also know the costs that we've mentioned before. By the way, that cost was the direct cost, indirect cost, and cost of opportunity.
Mm.
So that was the main shock driver for them. In addition, we've also uncovered many other use cases that I'm happy to expand on at a different time, but we've released a few research around shaded vulnerabilities that was kind of shocking, or internal dependency vulnerability that is originating from internal libraries that are developed by enterprises. So that what we kind of see that sticks with them is if you have a company that's ticketing their R&D organizations 100,000 times a year, 200,000 times a year, 500 times a year, we're talking about like a few thousands of developers, and this is after the triage process. The numbers just start piling up to enormous amount of money that we're spending on triaging things that don't matter. Yet the regulatory demands and customer demands are just increasing. Regulators are not going to say, "Hey, James, we're going to be a little less stringent on code security.
Mm.
We're going to care a little less about, what are the open source packages that are inside your application." We're actually seeing the opposite. Customers are demanding software bill of materials when they buy software. Regulatory bodies are really aggressive on vulnerability management, and especially when we're talking about vulnerability management, we are mostly speaking around, open source or operating system level because they don't have that level of visibility for proprietary vulnerabilities like your own logic. Um, so these are the main drivers that we see. The more mature your organization is, the more complex the environment is, the more developers you have, the more friction the security process between the software engineering organization and the product security organization becomes. This is where Hopper shines really, really, really bright.
Understood. And then you mentioned the whole regulations and compliance pressures there, whether it's PCI or FedRAMP or ISO. What part does Hopper play in helping organizations prepare for those specific compliance pressures?
So what we typically see with the regulatory body is that they are very aware of the risks associated with application development, especially around open source components, either from a vulnerability standpoint, malicious packages standpoint, licenses standpoint, etc. So what we do is we make sure that companies have the tools that within a click of a button they can basically attest. That could be a customer or the auditor. Everything their code depends on, every license associated with it, every known vulnerability associated with it, every evidence around are they affected by every vulnerability. So uh, this is still relatively in the early days and it's in infancy, but we see customers shifting from just issuing SBOMs to also issuing VEX file, which are like vulnerability and exploitability attestation files, where basically this is a way to communicate, hey, we're not affected by this, we are affected by that, etc. This is a CISA approved format, right? It's just a standardized way of communicating with auditors and customers the results of the triage process that we did for every vulnerability. Um, so we see more and more regulatory requirements on the one side, but then we also see the maturity of tools and communication protocols on the other to kind of be able to just comply with the scale and complexity that we're dealing with these days.
Understood. I mean, I'm just sort of sitting here jotting a few things down, and it seems from a cost, a time save, a production, compliance, it's a kind of like a no-brainer to get something like this involved in your organization to help. And so, with the sort of the world as it is at the moment, what's your perspective on how open source risk will evolve over the next 5 years or so?
So I think over the next 5 years, and then again, I'm not a prophet, but what we see is developers are just gonna keep on using a lot more open source components and AI models. That ship has got sailed, and I don't think it's ever coming back, and for good reason. The open source and AI model marketplaces are just offering benefits that are too difficult to ignore. Um, but we also see that AI models are heavily relying on open source components because that's what they're trained on. That's the data that they had when they were trained. And also, it makes sense because that's a well-maintained piece of code. On the same side, we're seeing developers become less and less deeply and intimately familiar with the code that they build because it was built by AI. So what we see, or our take, is that we're going to see a lot more software generated by a lot less humans. Um, and that means that we are going to see a lot more exposure on one side. On the other side, we are looking at a piece of code that is called open source that is widely available to offenders and attackers as well. And they have AI as well. So they can research at scale. They can generate exploitation much faster. If historically, if it took a couple of days, a week, a month to actually implement an exploit for a vulnerability, now we're talking about minutes, hours max. So the exposure surface is growing on one side, yet the offenders powered with AI are going to significantly shorten the time to exploitation. And already today in the marketplace, we see that the number one source of breaches has become vulnerability exploitation. I think a year or two ago, that was more around the identity space, but now vulnerability exploitation has become the number one source of breaches. So what we think is that over the next 5 years, these pressures, we're describing tectonic shifts that are here to stay, right? We are going to use more open source. We are going to build more software. Attackers are going to leverage AI. They're going to generate exploits much faster, etc. Um, so we think there has to be like a shift towards really being able to accurately map the risk, identify what matters and what doesn't, be able to act very, very quickly to remediate, whether that's by the classic patching process or other methods that we're happy to discuss. But we're going to see a lot more pressure on these teams, and they're going to have to, at some point, kind of transition to either modern tools or other processes or implement compensating controls because the state of affairs today is just not sustainable for where we're heading 5 years down the road.
Mm. It really does feel, just from an outsider's perspective, that we are right on the cusp of we're getting to sort of our limits here, and we need to change something to make this make this work in the future, I guess. And so, if I may, then, if you had to leave application security leaders with one takeaway around the future of open source security, what would that be?
We'll just start with like an intriguing question as if I was an application security leader in today's market, I would just try and ask myself, am I ready for the next couple of years in terms of where my program is going, the needs of my like R&D organization, etc. And am I really elevating the program to the place where I'm mindful of the business needs? And if the answer is yes, then I think you're in the right place. But if the answer is I think we can do something a little bit better, or if we keep on doing what we're doing now for the next couple of years, we're not going to be in a good spot, or we're going to be left behind, or we're not going to necessarily be able to innovate at the same pace. Then I think it's worthwhile just looking at what other tools today in the market are offering to just take some of that burden away, free up very, very precious resources. Bear in mind that irrespectively of whether we're talking about application security talent or software engineering talent, we're still talking about the relatively expensive side of the organizations. These are, talent pools that cost on average minimum 150, $200,000, sometimes a lot more. And this is where I think the future is heading. So if you're comfortable and you feel like you've done enough and you're ready for what's coming in terms of the amount of code, then kudos for you. And by the way, I'd be happy to chat and kind of learn how did you get there, and maybe we can learn something from your experience. I'm serious, but I'm not. We'd love to kind of see what your thoughts are on that and how did you get to that level of maturity so early. But if not, just think of what can you do tomorrow or sometime or next quarter to get ready for what's coming, to be a bit more mindful of your team's resources around triaging, to enable our engineering organization to just ship more software without the toil of kind of fixing things that don't matter, etc.
Of course, it sounds to me like if there's a hint of a uncertainty on preparedness there, then it's always worth a conversation just to see if nothing else. And so,
Absolutely.
last question from me. I've fired loads at you here, so appreciate you fielding all these. But Hopper has just celebrated their 2 years since founding, which is awesome. Out of stealth, funding, Fortune 500 customers. Looking back, is there any milestones that stick out for you as, crikey, I'm most proud of these?
So the first thing I think, to be perfectly honest, I'm very proud of the team we built. Essentially, we wake up every morning and we work with people.
Nice.
And these people are our team and our customers. So I think we're very proud of what we've been able to achieve in a very short time, in a very technically complex category and landscape. So that's that. And then the other thing is, just being able to see the level of engagements with our products within our customers. So yeah, we're still relatively young, but when you build a product in a category that many of the customers are kind of fatigued or bored with, and you see people getting into your product and kind of spending hours every day within the product, daily use, proliferating, inviting their team members, etc. That feeling of creation, of really generating value to other people, because we know they're not patient and we know they've seen a ton of other products and we know they've been in the cat. We've all, when we work with somebody, we know they had a different product in place or at least know of the category. So really be able to deliver something that they like, that they use, that drives value, that they share numbers with us, and be able to kind of really give them back the resources that they need to innovate and not just be minded with security noise all day long. That's what I'm personally most proud of. So team, customer, people side, but also creating something that is actually used by leading companies on a daily basis, and drives value.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I know I fired 1,000 things at you there, and I think just talking this through, there's probably room for sort of 3 or 4 more episodes on the back of this itself. But thank you again for joining. I'm really excited to share this one.
Oh, thank you for having me. Next time I'm going to interview you, like, what are you excited about application security and AI, and what's your take on where we're heading in the next 5 years?
I'm happy to share that. That's all good. Take care, man.